una oportunidad clave para identificar e implementar prioridades tecnológicas. Sin embargo, lamentamos la falta de apoyo a los mensajes clave y las recomendaciones del Comité Ejecutivo de Tecnología y la insuficiente solidaridad de los países desarrollados para fortalecer los vínculos entre tecnología y financiamiento. También estamos frustrados por el bloqueo a cualquier consideración de financiamiento en las salas de apoyo técnico y financiero para los reportes en transparencia, un ítem de agenda que aborda aspectos tanto técnicos como financieros. Este ítem debería ser un espacio para abordar ambos pilares de apoyo. Sin embargo, la negativa a incorporar elementos financieros socava su propósito. Nos ha llevado a un punto en el que preferimos no tener ninguna decisión antes que seguir discutiendo sin que se le dé el enfoque correcto. Los anteriores ejemplos van en contra de la idea de abordar la misión y los medios de implementación de manera conjunta. Presidente, en el programa de trabajo de mitigación vimos cómo los cofacilitadores bajo su propia autoridad y mandato presentaron una nota informal robusta e inclusiva, incluyendo mensajes sobre el papel fundamental de las finanzas públicas, la cooperación internacional, el acceso a la financiación y el tratamiento del coste del capital, todas ellas urgentes necesidades para los países en desarrollo. Lamentablemente no se logró ningún avance. Un grupo de países bloqueó el consenso sobre el estado de la nota y se rehusó a permitir que las visiones de otras partes fueran recogidas, repitiendo lo sucedido este año en Bonn. Recordamos a todas las partes que el párrafo 2 de la decisión 4CM4 garantiza que este proceso no impone obligaciones a ninguna de las partes y que alcanzar un acuerdo que hable sobre sustancia en esta decisión es esencial para crear el impulso necesario para aumentar la ambición y la aplicación en materia de mitigación. Los países AILA que están dispuestos a participar constructiva y activamente en la presente semana. Sin embargo, debemos ser claros, no apoyaremos ninguna decisión que carezca de sustancia. Presidente, recordemos que el balance mundial es el resultado más importante de la COP28. Sin embargo, su éxito no está garantizado por la decisión que tomamos en Dubái. Depende en gran medida de las decisiones que tomemos en esta COP. En términos de los elementos procedimentales y logísticos del balance mundial, celebramos el progreso hecho en las discusiones y reiteramos que buscaremos una decisión que nos ofrezca suficiente tiempo, flexibilidad e inclusión regional para garantizar un balance mundial más robusto y justo. En ese sentido, también queremos ser enfáticos sobre la importancia central que tiene el IPCC para el balance mundial. Es esencial que en la COP29 se garantice que el IPCC seguirá estando en el centro de nuestra toma de decisiones, incluyendo hacer todo a nuestro alcance para lograr que los informes de evaluación informen de manera oportuna al balance mundial. Ahora bien, sobre las modalidades del diálogo de los Emiratos Árabes Unidos para la implementación de los outcomes del balance mundial, reiteramos que es crucial que nos permita para comprender, hacer seguimiento al progreso de implementación de todos los resultados. Para ello es necesario identificar también las brechas, obstáculos y los retos, en particular en la provisión de financiamiento, desarrollo de capacidades y transferencia de tecnología, y a continuación debatir y proponer llamados, oportunidades y recomendaciones. Es crucial también que este diálogo aumente la transparencia en la financiación climática, añadiendo granularidad y centrándose en temas críticos como la capacidad de respuesta de los instrumentos financieros, la previsibilidad de la financiación y la accesibilidad y distribución equitativa de la financiación. Los hallazgos del diálogo identificados en el respectivo reporte anual deben ser recogidos en una decisión bajo un ítem de agenda para la consideración de la CMA. De esta forma, las partes podrán contar con instrumentos concebidos desde el multilateralismo que faciliten el financiamiento y otros medios de implementación. Presidente, como AILAC estamos profundamente comprometidos para lograr una decisión sobre el programa de trabajo de transición justa. Lamentamos que solo se hayan adoptado conclusiones procedimentales. Destacamos la importancia de mantener un enfoque multisectorial y multidimensional que abarque no solo la energía y el trabajo, sino también otros sectores claves para nuestros países, así como los medios de implementación y cooperación internacional para facilitar transiciones justas. El programa se implementará con base en los 7 elementos acordados en Dubái con el objetivo de obtener resultados concretos y útiles. Un elemento crucial para ILAC es incluir explícitamente una referencia a la transición para abandonar los combustibles fósiles y promover estrategias inclusivas y equilibradas entre mitigación, adaptación y pérdidas y daños. Presidente, ILAC valora los avances logrados en la integración de la perspectiva de género en las políticas climáticas. Sin embargo, consideramos que los esfuerzos actuales aún no han logrado un impacto estructural para cerrar las brechas de género. Para ILAC es imperativo no retroceder en el lenguaje previamente acordado, como el de derechos humanos, lo que significa no retroceder en la ambición de la transversalización de género dentro de los procesos de la Convención. La semana pasada no hemos llegado a los consensos esperados y por eso no hemos tomado una decisión. Instamos a que la COP29 apruebe esta semana la actualización del programa de trabajo de Lima sobre género. Estamos agradecidos con la Secretaría por haber entregado a tiempo la versión final de la herramienta para el reporte del marco reforzado de transparencia y por haber organizado talleres de formación. Reconocemos la importancia de una interfaz de datos actualizada para facilitar el acceso a las estimaciones preparadas por todas las partes y esperamos poder acordar un plan de trabajo. Esperamos que se reconozcan nuestras necesidades para la aplicación del marco reforzado de transparencia y que se evalúen mejor para recibir un apoyo adecuado y oportuno. Al cierre de la semana hemos visto buenos resultados en la sala de artículo 6. Consideramos que los borradores actuales son una buena base. Esperamos esta semana no perdamos de vista y debemos seguir luchando para la transparencia e integridad medioambiental si queremos que sea un mercado creíble y apto para su propósito. Para ir finalizando, no podemos ignorar que un resultado sólido en materia de financiamiento será clave para facilitar las discusiones relacionadas con la ambición. Es fundamental mantener la integración entre acción y medios de implementación, una conexión que hemos defendido firmemente en estas negociaciones. Solo al abordar estas discusiones con este enfoque integral podremos enviar una señal positiva y esperanzadora para la humanidad. NCQG es la prioridad de esta COP y así lo es para ILAC. Reiteramos nuestra firme disposición a seguir trabajando y cooperando en esta nueva etapa con el objetivo de establecer una meta que responda de manera efectiva a necesidades y prioridades. Hemos avanzado la semana pasada, aunque no al ritmo esperado. Confiamos que los diálogos ministeriales de la presente semana serán clave para lograr el progreso significativo. ILAC reitera su disposición a colaborar estrechamente con la Presidencia para alcanzar los consensos necesarios. Gracias.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Malawi to deliver a statement on behalf of least developed countries. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Presidency, chairs, co-chairs, distinguished delegates and colleagues. The Republic of Malawi is honored to speak on behalf of the 45 LDCs. We align ourselves to the statement made by Uganda on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, and Kenya on behalf of the African Group, as well as Samoa on behalf of the OASIS. We'd like to express our gratitude to the Presidency, Secretariat, and the co-chairs for providing unwavering support and continued guidance. The LDCs have special needs and circumstances which are well enshrined in the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We must continue to operate within the principles of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. As we reflect on week one, we seem to have made some progress in some matters. On behalf of the LDC Group, I'll highlight the following. The LDC Group welcomes the smooth conclusion of agenda items such as capacity building, the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security, on Article 6.8, and on action for climate empowerment. We look forward to the expedited implementation of the recommendations made on these agenda items. The LDC Group reiterates that the new climate finance goal, which remains the defining moment for COP29, should reflect the scale of the crisis and match up to the efforts needed to address climate change in our countries. COP29 must deliver an ambitious new goal that will meet the needs of the LDCs. As we have indicated previously, we need to have elements that will tell us what climate finance is, and also a clear allocation to the LDCs and seeds. On other matters on climate finance, we expect to also get outcomes that will give the LDCs group climate financing that is adequate, accessible, scaled up, and being largely public and in the form of grant money. However, we are deeply concerned that some of the discussions did not progress in line with the urgency that the climate crisis demands. We urge all parties to commit to delivering substantive and concrete outcomes on important and critical agenda items such as loss and damage, gender, technology, Article 6.2 and 6.4, transparency, mitigation work program, and global stocktake. Failure is not an option at this COP. We need to finalize it here in Baku to ensure that we move towards implementation. On adaptation, for LDCs, this is the lifeline of our group. We are happy to see the work of the leg strengthened and to have achieved a draft decision. However, on global goal on adaptation and NAPS, concluding with a draft text is both alarming and unacceptable. Presidency, chairs of the subsidiary bodies, distinguished delegates and colleagues, in all matters still ongoing under the CMA, CMP, and COP, we rely on the guidance and support of the presidency, chairs and co-chairs, and we look forward to further engagement to make the much-needed progress on the remaining items. Let us remind all those in this room of our obligation to those that are most vulnerable, suffering the adverse effects of climate change. The clock is ticking. We must do better, and the time is now. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Saudi Arabia to deliver a statement on behalf of Arab states. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي مختار بابايف رئيس الدورة 29 لمؤتمر تغير المناخ. أصحاب السمو، أصحاب المعالي، الزميلات والزملاء، يتحدث وفد بلادي باسم 22 دولة عضو في جامعة الدول العربية. بداية تود المجموعة العربية أن تبدي عن دعمها الخالص للرئاسة الأذربيجانية خلال مؤتمر الأطراف 29. أن المجموعة العربية تضم صوتها لبيان جمهورية أوغندا باسم مجموعة 77 والصين. السادة الرؤساء، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على ضرورة الالتزام بمبادئ الاتفاقية الإطارية لتغير المناخ، وبالأخص مبدأ الإنصاف والمسؤولية المشتركة ولكن المتباينة، وتفعيل هذه المبادئ في حزمة الإجراءات والقرارات التي يتم التفاوض عليها. السادة الرؤساء، بالنسبة إلى الهدف الكمي الجديد، نؤكد على مسؤولية الدول المتقدمة بموجب المادة 9 من اتفاق باريس في تقديم الدعم المالي للدول النامية، ويجب احترام وتنفيذ القرارات السابقة وعدم تحويل المسؤوليات والالتزامات. كما نؤكد على أهمية وضع هدف طموح يتوائم مع احتياجات الدول النامية ومبني على مبادئ وأحكام الاتفاقية الإطارية للتغير المناخي واتفاق باريس، وخاصة مبدأ المسؤولية المشتركة ولكن المتباينة. ومن المؤسف أننا نرى محاولات بتضعيف هذه المبادئ والابتعاد من الوعود والالتزامات، وترفض هذه المجموعة هذه المحاولات تماما. ندعو الدول الأطراف لمناقشة الهدف بشكل جدي يعكس أهمية النقاش لكي نصل إلى نتيجة منصفة وشاملة. كما نود التأكيد على دور التكيف في معالجة آثار تغير المناخ، ومن الضروري ضمان استجابة ملائمة للتكيف للتأثيرات الناتجة عن هدف درجة الحرارة المشار إليه في المادة 2 من اتفاق باريس، بما يسهم في تحقيق التنمية المستدامة. السادة الرؤساء، ترى المجموعة العربية نتائج عملية الجرد العالمي بمنظور شمولي يأخذ في عين الاعتبار تطبيق مبادئ الإنصاف والمسؤوليات المشتركة ولكن المتباينة، وأولويات ونهج الدول المختلفة، والتعاون الدولي، وأهمية زيادة وسائل التنفيذ لدعم الدول النامية في تحقيق مساهماتهم المحددة وطنيا. وعطفا على ذلك، فإنه من المقلق تراجع بعض الدول عما تم الاتفاق عليه في دبي بتأسيس حوار للتمويل، ونحث الجميع على الالتزام بذلك في مفاوضات باكو. كما تؤكد المجموعة على أهمية برنامج عمل التخفيف كمساحة لتبادل الخبرات وإجراء الحوارات حول أفضل الممارسات والحلول المختلفة في مجال التخفيف المتناسبة مع الظروف الوطنية، بالإضافة إلى إبراز التحديات التي تواجه الدول النامية ووسائل الدعم اللازمة. ومن هذا المنطلق يجب التأكيد على العناصر الأساسية لبرنامج عمل التخفيف والالتزام الكامل بما تم الاتفاق عليه في شرم الشيخ، حيث أن مخرجات برنامج عمل التخفيف غير توجيهية وتحترم السيادة والظروف الوطنية وتأخذ في الاعتبار المساهمات المحددة وطنيا وتتوافق بشكل كلي مع ما تضمنت اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ واتفاق باريس، وعدم الخروج عن بنود تلك الاتفاقيات، خاصة من خلال تفعيل مبادئ الإنصاف والمسؤوليات المشتركة ولكن المتباينة. السادة الرؤساء، تؤكد المجموعة العربية أن تخفيف الآثار الاجتماعية والاقتصادية لتدابير الاستجابة يأتي على رأس أولويات البلدان النامية التي تسعى لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وضمان النمو والازدهار الاقتصادي. وفي هذا السياق تشدد المجموعة على أهمية توافق الأطراف على خطة عمل مرنة وفعالة تسهم في تمكين الدول من التقليل من الآثار السلبية لتدابير الاستجابة لتغير المناخ. كما تحرص المجموعة على أن تشمل خطة العمل أنشطة متنوعة تدعم الدول في تحقيق تنميتها المستدامة وطموحاتها المناخية. السادة الرؤساء، في الختام نتطلع للاستمرار بالعمل تحت قيادتكم في مختلف المواضيع تحت مؤتمر الأطراف 29 بنفس روح العمل والتعاون للوصول إلى مخرجات تصب في مصلحة الجميع، ونتطلع قدما لنجاح باكو تحت قيادة الفريق الرئاسي المقتدر. وشكرا.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Pakistan to deliver a statement. Pakistan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Pakistan extends its appreciation to the COP presidency and the UNF Secretariat for hosting COP29 and facilitating this important dialogue. I would also like to indicate full support to the statement made by Uganda on behalf of G77 plus China and the statement made by Bolivia on behalf of LMDC. Chair, this is a critical decade for climate action, and the discussions we have here will shape our collective response to the climate crisis. The urgency is not new. It stems from years of unmet promises and insufficient action, leaving vulnerable countries like Pakistan facing the severe impact of a crisis we did not cause. The global climate finance system remains fundamentally flawed, unable to meet developing countries' requirements for climate goals. Despite repeated calls from the global south, developed nations have failed to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement. This is not just about finance, it's about accountability, transparency, and climate justice. The inaction has left vulnerable countries like Pakistan bearing the brunt of climate change impacts. According to World Bank, $348 billion are required by 2030 to achieve climate resilience. For over a decade, the promise of $100 billion annually by 2020 remains unmet. While reports claim the target has been achieved, most of the funds provided are as loans, worsening the debt burden of developing nations. Relying on the private sector alone is not a solution, Chair, especially when it comes to adaptation financing. Public funding must remain central, as adaptation is the most urgent priority for countries like Pakistan. Climate finance is not a voluntary gesture. It is a legal and moral duty. As per UNEP Adaptation Gap Report 2024, the adaptation finance gap is persistent, which is estimated at $187 to $359 billion per year, required for the developing countries. Pakistan strongly supports the commitment to doubling adaptation financing as a critical step in addressing the escalating impacts of climate change, particularly for countries like ours, facing disproportionate risks despite contributing minimally to global emissions. It is crucial that the gap between the global climate finance commitments and their implementation should be narrowed, with a balanced focus on adaptation and mitigation, as well as loss and damage. Achieving this objective requires urgent and practical implementation measures to ensure timely and equitable access to these funds. We urge developed countries and international financial institutions to adopt transparent mechanisms, simplify procedures, reduce barriers for accessing adaptation funds, and an effective and transparent reporting to monitor mobilization of funds. For adaptation, it's important that the indicators should be focusing on implementation mechanisms. There is an urgent need for enhanced global climate action and international cooperation to mitigate the negative impact of climate change before it is too late, based on the established principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. On Article 6, Pakistan calls for the fair and just operationalization, urging all parties to resolve outstanding issues through cooperation. A transparent framework is crucial for boosting investor confidence and scaling up mitigation efforts. This will help countries meet their NDCs and move toward net zero targets. We need swift action to restore trust, enhance support, and drive real progress in achieving our shared climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Fiji to deliver a statement. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Mr. President, I take the floor on behalf of Fiji and align with the statement delivered by Samoa on behalf of our EUSIS. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation for the hard work of many of our co-facilitators. But my appreciation is also colored by extreme concern. We have not made very much progress on the areas that are of the greatest concerns to Pacific SIDS and countries that are at the front line of the impacts of climate change. Mr. President, in Fiji, there is a famous vernacular proverb which reads, "E sangani wukana kaka, membiu toka nambuina." Mr. President, when translated, it means that the parrot will not fly, leaving its tail in its nest. This proverb is about remembering that all things that are essential, just like the processes that have been undertaken to get us here, and the processes that lay before us, and must be grounded by the lived realities of our different communities. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, our ambitions must be elevated to match the scale of the challenges we face. The deferral in outcomes is a clear reflection of eroded trust and principles of international cooperation. We can and we must rebuild this trust. But ambition alone is not sufficient. We must translate our unwavering commitment to the Paris Agreement into implementable actions. And our actions, Mr. President, must be implemented with the highest degree of diligence and urgency. We need a qualitative change in both pace and ambition as we get into this, the second and final week of the COP. For pace, can I please urge all of my distinguished colleagues in this conference to engage on the text, or at least the main ideas in the text, we are very disappointed with the lack of constructive engagement. We cannot afford to be stuck in procedural niceties and technicalities, which have had the effect of delaying substantive discussions and outcomes. On finance ambition, let me emphasize again that an ambitious outcome must focus not only on how much, but also on how the finance will flow. Our outcome should ensure new, predictable climate finance that reflects the needs of countries that are especially vulnerable to climate change. It should have a floor on the finance provision on loss and damage and adaptation, as well as a value reflecting the mobilization goals. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, although this has been dubbed as the Finance COP, there are many other fiercely important agenda items where we need ambitious outcomes. We still have hope for an ambitious outcome on adaptation that will let us measure truly transformative adaptation through the global goal on adaptation. We need an outcome on national adaptation plans because we are expected to be submitting our revised NAPs, and decision will serve as a guidance. Both the GGA and NAP will ensure financial flows for adaptation. Mr. President, these outcomes must ensure equity in resources for all women and girls, indigenous people and local communities, youth and children that we represent. Distinguished delegates, we can only make progress if we think progressively and engage constructively. We continue to see parties trying to renegotiate past decisions, which is extremely concerning. Fiji is here to uphold the commitment we have made to the Paris Agreement and to the Convention. We urge other parties to do the same. The world cannot wait while we dither at this conference. Mr. President, this must be a defining COP. It needs your leadership to transform our vision for climate justice into reality. Rinakabak Lebu, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Mexico to make a statement. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm actually speaking on behalf of the Environment Integrity Group. And today, on Gender Day, we also want to highlight that we have much work to do on the Gender Action Plan. And we can't accept to backtrack in agreed language on human rights and gender-responsive policies. So we ask parties to work constructively to move forwards, not backwards. And today is also Youth and Children Day, so we need to reflect on intergenerational equity. Let us make sure that the outcomes we take at this COP honor future generations. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Iran to make a statement. Iran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, friends and colleagues, at the outset, we wish to express our delight for attending this conference with the hope to continue our deliberations with a positive and constructive approach. However, taking into account our experience of the first week, we wish to highlight some important points to ensure that we would be able to achieve our common objective our common objectives at the end of COP29 and to make Baku conference a success. Accordingly, we fully share and align with the statements by the G77 and China, as well as the LNDC. Among the issues of priorities and needs to be emphasized are the negotiations and consultations must be party-driven, transparent, and inclusive, and to be undertaken in a balanced manner. The esteemed co-facilitators of various agenda items should be given guidance to take all parties' views into account and to avoid personal or any specific group agenda in the course of negotiations. Negotiations should merely take place within the approved mandate and not include any personal outside of it. The non-papers and proposed proposals of all members and the groups to be considered in an equal, balanced, and transparent manner. Mr. President, on the issue of finance, in particular the NCQG, the situation is disappointing since no substantive progress has been made and no number is on the table. This is a finance COP. We yet to see progress in adopting financial pledges by developed countries to ensure implementation of climate action. This is the fact that we shall try to achieve an ambitious climate finance goal of grand nature, which shall be traceable and quantifiable if we wish to ensure timely and effective implementation of climate actions to respond to the needs of requirements of developing countries. Regarding mitigation work program, we are also disappointed that due to an imbalanced and selective approach in proposing the relevant non-paper, we could not achieve the expected outcome. Taking into account consideration that many developing countries did their best to continue the negotiations with good will and in constructive manner. At the end, my delegation wishes you, Mr. President, and the best and assure of our full support, and we look forward to ambitious and successful outcomes of the 29th COP meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Colombia to make a statement. Colombia, the floor is yours.
Gracias, señor presidente, por darnos el uso de la palabra. Colombia se alinea con la posición expresada por Perú en nombre de AILAC. Nuestro país históricamente ha ostentado una posición de alta ambición, no solo señor presidente, le ofrecemos disculpas. Nuestra ministra recién llega de su agenda y les ofrezco por favor que nos regalen unos segundos mientras ella toma el asiento y asume el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. President, and sorry for the delay. We would like to reflect on the discussion so far on the mitigation work program and call so that this program continues its work during this week and doesn't go to Article 16. The IPCC is clear in terms of our capacity still to be able to reach a strong 2030 goal. And that could happen if we focus our efforts and if we are able to create a process of synergy, collaboration, and global solidarity. It is clear that if we could really triple renewables, but not only on the global north, as it's happening 1 year after Dubai, but actually globally, with access to capital and to financial resources for developing countries, we could achieve social progress as well as energy transition and decarbonization. The IPCC also tells us that the second most important measure we could take and cost-effective is to restore nature and to stop deforestation. And the countries that have the forest right now need access to capital and access to the capabilities to be able to sustain that ecological function that we are providing to the world. And so far, that's why, as the IPCC also stated, we cannot separate adaptation, mitigation, and finance. If we are able to grant the finance to sustain the forest and restore nature, and also taking the result from Cali here to Baku, where actually the biodiversity and climate resolution was approved, we will be able to also create a capacity to get to 2030 with our target. And, Mr. President, even oil nations, oil-producing nations, could make their part. We need to transition away from fossil fuels. This is a whole economic challenge. And I'm also speaking from a medium oil producer and coal exporter. But until 2030, if we are able to tackle the methane emissions effectively, globally, we could work on our part. So it is time that we focus. If we could create 3 global programs around these priorities that, as you see, can give a role to all. Developing countries with the right access to capital, to the energy transition, not only triple and renewables on the north, forest countries and biodiversity countries, but also oil-producing countries. And if the G20 countries make their part in reducing emissions as they account for 84%, we could move forward. But this is not the time, Mr. President, to send this program to Article 16 and as if nothing has happened in Dubai. So we will invite all to assume our parts, work together, put the finance forward, and prioritize in a mitigation work program that brings results first to 2030, and then we could be moving and in the spirit of solidarity, international cooperation, and global commitment. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Paraguay to make a statement. Paraguay, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gracias, señor presidente. Paraguay se suma a las palabras del distinguido delegado de Uganda en nombre del G77 y China. Como está consagrado en el artículo 2 del Acuerdo de París, la búsqueda de objetivos climáticos debe realizarse en el contexto del desarrollo sostenible y la erradicación de la pobreza. El principio de responsabilidades comunes pero diferenciadas y capacidades respectivas no es negociable, ya que constituye un pilar fundamental del régimen climático global. Los países en desarrollo no deben verse forzados a elegir entre su desarrollo y la acción contra el cambio climático. Debemos recordar que el desarrollo social y económico es una parte integral del desarrollo sostenible y es lo que permite a los países adoptar medidas para enfrentar el cambio climático. En este contexto, las vías de transición justa deben promover el crecimiento a largo plazo, la inclusión y el bienestar para todos, manteniendo el enfoque en mejorar la calidad ambiental y fortaleciendo las acciones contra el cambio climático en todas sus dimensiones, incluidas la adaptación, la mitigación, el financiamiento, la tecnología y la creación de capacidades. En particular, Paraguay, como país en desarrollo sin litoral, enfrenta desafíos adicionales dada su condición geográfica. los países en desarrollo sin litoral tenemos necesidades y preocupaciones específicas y así lo reconoce el artículo 4 de la Convención. En el caso de Paraguay, los efectos del aumento de las sequías impactan directamente en la navegabilidad de los ríos, principal vía de conexión del país con el mundo. Así también tienen un impacto en la generación de energía eléctrica a través de nuestras hidroeléctricas. En línea con estos desafíos a los que nos enfrentamos, consideramos esencial, en virtud del artículo 3.5 de la Convención, que las partes cooperen para promover un sistema económico internacional abierto y favorable que conduzca al crecimiento económico sostenible de todas las partes, en particular de los países en desarrollo. Las medidas contra el cambio climático, incluidas las unilaterales, no deben convertirse en medios de discriminación arbitraria ni en restricciones encubiertas al comercio internacional. La cooperación en un marco de comercio internacional justo es indispensable para que países como el Paraguay puedan avanzar en sus compromisos de desarrollo sostenible. Las medidas coercitivas unilaterales son contrarias al espíritu del multilateralismo que debe primar para una acción climática robusta, justa, ambiciosa y efectiva. Como sabemos, el financiamiento está en el centro de las discusiones de esta COP. El financiamiento adecuado y accesible es esencial para que los países en desarrollo puedan implementar sus compromisos de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático. El nuevo objetivo colectivo cuantificado es fundamental para asegurar los recursos necesarios para que los países en desarrollo, y creemos firmemente que su enfoque principal debe centrarse en la provisión de financiamiento público. Tanto la Convención como el Acuerdo de París son claros en cuanto a la responsabilidad de los países desarrollados en este sentido. Paraguay confía en que trabajando juntos y con compromiso podemos construir un marco de cooperación financiera verdaderamente sustentable. Este marco debe respetar el derecho de cada nación al desarrollo y asegurar que todos los países en desarrollo cuenten con el respaldo necesario para enfrentar los desafíos climáticos de nuestro tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. I now invite the Russian Federation to make a statement. The floor is yours.
Спасибо большое, уважаемый господин председатель. Прежде всего, хотели бы выразить признательность за все ваши усилия на протяжении первой недели сессии. Наша работа входит в решающую стадию. В этой связи всем сторонам необходимо активизировать поиск консенсусных решений по оставшимся пунктам повестки дня. Борьба с изменением климата неразрывно связана с устойчивым развитием и ликвидацией нищеты. Свободная торговля может помочь странам в достижении климатических целей и обеспечении экономического роста для устойчивого развития, что особенно важно для развивающихся стран. Введение односторонних торговых барьеров под прикрытием мер борьбы с изменением климата приводит к негативным экономическим последствиям и подрывает коллективные усилия стран по достижению целей РКИП-ООН и Парижского соглашения. Пункт 5 статьи 3 Конвенции устанавливает, что меры по борьбе с изменением климата, включая односторонние, не должны служить средством произвольной или необоснованной дискриминации или скрытого ограничения международной торговли. Несмотря на это, вопросы негативных последствий введения подобных мер для развивающихся стран не обсуждаются в рамках текущей повестки конференции. В рамках рабочей программы ОАЭ по справедливому переходу и форуму по воздействию мер реагирования обсуждение односторонних мер блокируется представителями развитых стран. С учетом возрастающей важности данного вопроса необходимо начать диалог по обсуждению негативных последствий введения односторонних мер, подрывающих международную торговлю и негативно влияющих на социально-экономическое развитие стран. Благодарю вас за внимание. Спасибо.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Indonesia to make a statement. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the government and people of Indonesia, I express our gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan for hosting this session and for your leadership in directing this first week of negotiations here in Baku. However, After a full week of discussion, it is disappointing that several critical agenda items have not been resolved and will be carried out over the next session in Bonn. These items, including mitigation efforts, loss and damage, through the WIM EXCOM and the 2024 WIM review, must be prioritized and finalized immediately. Indonesia emphasized that the NAP process must be party-led, with private sector support enhancing local level adaptations effort. Indonesia calls for urgent actions on mitigation work programs, emphasizing the importance of concrete, urgent measures in these critical decades. We insist that the MWP's mandates must support the global stocktake, complementing effort to scale up mitigation's ambitions and its implementations. The MVP should also encourage submissions on how to improve the GDIFE process, which will continue until 2026, and ensure that solutions are scaled up in alignment with global climate targets. Regarding the Just Transition Work Program, Indonesia underscores the importance of equity and adherence to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. The work program must ensure that the socio-economic impact of the transitions are addressed in a fair and balanced way, with adequate support for developing countries to implement a just transition in line with the global climate goals. On NCQG agenda, Indonesia stresses that the CBDRRC principle remain fundamental. Developed countries, as the largest historical emitters, must take the lead in providing financial resources and technology to support developing countries' adaptations and mitigation efforts. Clear aims and robust support for countries' national plans are essential for the success of this process. As for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, Indonesia is eager to see its full implementations and adoptions of the necessary decisions in the session. We urge all parties to resolve on the outstanding issues so that we can operationalize these crucial mechanisms to achieve the agreement's objective. On the agenda of United Arab Emirates dialogue on implementing the outcomes of the global stocktake, for the spirit of making progress toward a meaningful CMA decisions, Indonesia is willing to consider the latest iterations of the informal notes as the basis for discussions under CMA agenda. In conclusion, Indonesia is committed to working closely with all delegations in the remaining days of these sessions. We stand ready to engage constructively to ensure that the outcomes of the COP29 are operationalized effectively without further delays. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Turkey to make a statement. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Thank you for introducing this week's mode of work. On finance, while there have been different views on most elements of NCQG, it's encouraging to see that parties have been able to reach a common ground on key issues such as transparency and access. We should keep this bright for this week, and NCQG decision must be taken in Baku. On adaptation agenda, we believe that the refinement of the indicators developed by technical experts under the global goal on adaptation is necessary and supports the establishment of an inclusive and trackable roadmap between COP29 and COP30. On loss and damage agenda, we highlight the importance of developing technical guidelines and information sharing mechanisms for developing countries. On Article 6, despite the complex agenda and various views among the parties, we consider the progress achieved so far on Article 6 to be positive. On modalities of UAE dialogue, we still see many areas of disagreement among parties on informal note, while there are aspects with the informal note that we do not agree. We value the text that capture all the views and which will facilitate constructive engagement. On procedural and logistical elements of overall global stocktake process, the draft text can serve as baseline for further discussions. However, we believe the draft text consists of some elements that must be addressed within the GST outcome itself, such as the follows-up processes and some elements that inclusion of non-negotiated text, which we do not support them to be a part of the GST outcome. On mitigation program work, we express our appreciation for the efforts conducted under the MWP. We are pleased to engage in and support the MWP, highlighting its crucial role in facilitating the exchange of information and ideas without introducing any new targets or commitments and not integrating new elements that beyond the defined scope and mandate of the program. On response measures, the delay in determining forward-looking actions under response measures remains an issue. Such delays hinder the progress needed to address critical challenges and undermine the collective efforts required to achieve all shared climate goals. As I conclude my words, I like to say we need work on together. We need ambitious targets, sharing knowledge and technology cooperation, and most importantly, constructive dialogue to keep the Paris Agreement viable. Turkey will continue to work with all parties for the success of COP29. I thank you.
Thank you, Turkey, for your statement. We now invite civil society representatives to make statements, which should be limited to 2 minutes. I now give the floor to the representatives of ENGO, a constituency of environmental non-governmental organizations. There are 2 speakers who will have 1 minute each. First, I give the floor to a representative from Climate Action Network. Please, the floor is yours. Next time, I give the floor to a representative from Demand Climate Justice.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Paloma Jofre, and I am speaking on behalf of ENGO DCJ. I voluntarily declare that I have no ties with the fossil fuel industries or other emissions-intensive industries and no conflict of interest. I come from waPo Mapuche territory in South America, where our communities and our land cannot afford more extractivism. We cannot afford more false solutions. We may be in week 2 of this COP, but really we have been at this same juncture for nearly 30 years. When are you all gonna wake up? Wake up! There are nearly 1,800 fossil fuel lobbyists at COP29. Why are they here? To protect their dirty business and the rail negotiations. We know who's to blame for the climate crisis. You, rich countries, and the fossil fuel industry. We demand an ambitious NCQG of 5 trillion USD per year in public and non-debt creating climate finance. Don't say you don't have the money, you just choose to spend it on war, conflict and genocide, and in supporting big polluters. I now speak to our governments. You represent millions of people suffering from the climate crisis. Stand up for our survival. A bad deal, one that shifts the burden to the global South countries or dilutes the global North's obligation, is worse than not deal at all. Don't let global North governments derail this process and sow division. Our power lies in our solidarity. We simply cannot afford another shameful and empty outcome. We are asking for our right to exist. Defund genocide, fund climate justice.
Thank you. I invite the representative on behalf of farmers and agricultural non-governmental organizations to deliver a statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Sharon Cherono from Kenya. I'm speaking on behalf of farmers from across the world in the farmers' constituency. As SB 61 is ending, farmers acknowledge the pragmatic approach taken by parties and presidency to prioritize key agenda items. Noting the conclusion on the sham joint work on agriculture, we thank parties for working collaboratively on online portal. At the same time, we emphasize the need to shift the focus on issues and means of implementation which are more relevant to action on the ground. This week, we urge parties towards an ambitious NCQG which is relevant for farmers, especially small scale, by significantly increasing adaptation grants and facilitating direct access of the farmers' organizations. We urge parties towards a focus on farmers' rights and clear benefits for farmers in the development of carbon markets under Article 6.4, making sure nature-based solutions are not sidetracked. We urge parties towards significant progress on a GGA framework which must be applicable to the diversity of agri-ecosystems and the complexity of agricultural sector. We urge parties towards a strong role for farmers in the implementation of COP decisions, including an active observer role in loss and damage fund board. In the COP29 outcomes, we wish to see a clear recognition of our engagement and aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the representative speaking on behalf of indigenous peoples' organizations to deliver a statement. You have the floor.
Thank you. Respectful greetings. As indigenous peoples, we are grateful for the adoption of the Baku work plan of the Indigenous Peoples Platform. However, we are disappointed with the absence of real commitments to our rights, knowledge systems, and participation in all negotiation items at COP29. We reaffirm our vital role as stewards of all ecosystems and territories, contributing invaluable knowledge, practices, and science for solutions that transcend traditional climate approaches. All negotiations must respect, promote, and safeguard our distinct status, knowledge, and rights as reaffirmed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We therefore call for the following. On Article 6, compensation-based private finance through markets cannot be considered climate finance under the NCQG. Our rights, in particular, free, prior, and informed consent, must be promoted and cannot be afterthought in 6.2 and 6.4. In NCQG, we demand direct and equitable access to climate finance, in all 7 socio-cultural regions, while rejecting loans and funding tied to false solutions. A final text must include provisions on qualitative elements and ensure transparent financing. The global goal on adaptation, loss and damage, and just transition must ensure indigenous peoples' direct and enhanced engagement on our rights and knowledge systems. Just transition must include phasing out all fossil fuels and foster a transition to sustainable agriculture and food systems. We are here to make real progress for our peoples, future generations, and the planet we call our mother. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we would like to give a chance to Climate Action Network to say, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Bucha, and I am speaking on behalf of Climate Action Network. I voluntarily disclose that I have no direct ties to the fossil fuel industry or any other emission-intensive industry, and no conflict of interest. The past week perfectly summed up the last 30 years of climate negotiations. All talk, all gas, and no will. Coming here, we knew that finance was the piece that would unlock ambition and action in all the other spaces. It is critical piece, the keystone that upholds the promise that the Convention and Paris Agreement symbolizes. It is absolutely shameful that at the midway point, we have essentially nothing to show beyond the empty words and hollow proclamation with which we are all too familiar by now. We can predict the words that you will say and the nothingness that will follow behind. It's deflating to hear outside these corridors in the real world that this is a failed process, a glorified talk shop that only cares about the elites. But can we be surprised? So far, you have only confirmed this notion and betrayed a disconnect that is difficult to fathom. You are failing your mandate to the people of the world to safeguard their interests and to avoid the most catastrophic, devastating consequences of climate change in a way that is fair and equitable. What we have seen instead is the perpetuation of the power imbalances that have shaped this incredibly unequal world. At this point, we have seen no heart. As we head into the week of political negotiation, we need leaders to show the courage at this moment demands, and that has been so woefully lacking. The task at hand is clear. You must deliver the provision of trillions of dollars in predictable, accountable public finance from developed countries to developing countries. We have heard enough of hemming and hawing and evasion of responsibilities, especially from the developed countries. It is time to own up and pay out. There can be no climate justice without gender justice and human rights. Cease fire now, defund genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of research and independent non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to address this closing plenary on behalf of Ringo. My name is Shira Lauren with Conservation International. Ringo appreciates the dedication and commitment that all parties and observers have demonstrated across the SB proceedings, contributing to advancing collective climate change goals. As the SB sessions closed, we look forward to significant progress across all agenda items by the end of COP29. Ringo would like to stress the importance of transparent, inclusive, and cooperative decision-making that is based on the best available science and in alignment with indigenous, traditional, and local community knowledge. The impacts of climate change are now being felt across our society and natural ecosystems. From the mountains and great ice sheets to the ocean, impacts are disrupting economies, affecting global health, and endangering food security. As such, alignment across global governance mechanisms is needed to address compounding issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, and development needs. In a time of uncertainty and rapid change, Ringo advocates for a science-based, collaborative, and holistic approach to supporting the development of long-term viable solutions to complex socio-ecological problems. We continue to invite parties to prioritize realistic, equitable, scientific, and rights and performance-based approaches, and to collaborate with researchers in the pursuit of transparent, actionable, and implementable NDCs and in the development of NAPs. We assert that innovative and resilient technology frameworks that value performance, scalability, and impact can catalyze the transition necessary for reaching Paris Agreement goals. In addition, we believe nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches can effectively deliver climate change mitigation and adaptation, build resilience, and improve livelihoods. We strongly encourage parties to find an enduring solution for the NCQG and finance agenda items, as access to adequate and predictable finance enables climate action. Closing the climate finance gap is essential to bridging the divide between ambitious goals and current capabilities, especially in terms of capacity building, knowledge sharing, and equitable access to data alongside transfer of technology. In conclusion, Ringos continue to offer our support as a knowledge and reflection community. We have the resources, knowledge, and skills necessary to engage and catalyze civil society and transdisciplinary scientific communities for the future work to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the representative on behalf of trade union non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished delegates. I am Rebecca Okello. I speak on behalf of the trade unions, the democratic representative of workers worldwide. We represent nearly 200 million workers in 164 countries. I declare that I have no conflict of interest with the fossil fuel industry. After weeks of negotiation, we see a huge and utterly whirling disconnect between the needs in society and the status of the negotiation. Workers are dying from the impact of climate change due to heat stress, floods, forest fire, and droughts. They are begging you for actions, for a signal coming out of those negotiations that shows that there is distress is seriously taken into account. Let's look closer to the different items that are crucial for workers. On the NCQG, we see that the negotiation are stalled. The rich countries are not taking up their responsibility. We need the figures on the table, and they must be in trillions. Rich countries rather like to talk about the responsibility of other countries than their own. This is not accountable. But we are clear. We also need a focus on public financing against privatization and engagement with workers through a labor-focused just transition. On the JET-TWP, we are truly discouraged by the lack of engagement on discussions, accountable outcomes of the scope of the work programs as discussed last year. We need a work program to implement the work program. We need a commitment from the parties to engage on all dimensions of just transition, specifically through the NDCs and reporting. We see that the legitimate representatives of democratically organized labor unions are widely outnumbered by corporate interests. For every trade union delegate at the COP, there are at least 17 fossil fuel lobbyists here. If we want an ambitious and fair agreement, we need a fair negotiation process. And finally, we want to repeat this. Climate action is also about ending violence, war,
conflict, and repression everywhere. There will be no climate justice without social justice and peace. Ceasefire now. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite a representative on behalf of the Women and Gender constituency to deliver a statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Maria Majidova, speaking on behalf of the Women and Gender constituency, representing feminists, women and gender advocates worldwide. Co-chairs, we are concerned about the status of negotiations on the gender work program. We come to this COP29 to defend our rights, our livelihoods and our lives. We wanted to bear witness and to remind parties that their decision at this COP has a direct impact on the lives of millions of women and girls in all their diversity around the world. Our demands remain the same: a work program and gender action plan that is ambitious, inclusive, intersectional, measurable, cohesive and resourced. After hours of closed-door meetings, we expected the commitment to uphold gender equality progressively, expand ambition, or at least hold the line with existing human rights agreements. Instead, parties are repeating endlessly their red lines, some of them dragging us backward to the world where our sheer existence is being questioned. The Women and Gender constituency is saddened to see parties bracketing just transition, questioning our right to land, and demanding our protection against violence. Co-chairs, for far too long, feminists have demanded gender-responsive climate finance to deliver effective, gender-just climate action. We expected the NCQG decision would ensure critical access to finance for locally led, rights-based climate action, often led by women and girls. After 3 years of making our voices heard in technical discussions, we expected the fundamental understanding that climate finance that isn't gender-responsive and human rights-based is ineffective. We're expecting finance to meet the scale of needs. Yet now we are concerned that parties are forgetting what is at stake if this COP can't deliver new, additional, predictable, grant-based and ambitious climate change finance at scale and quality responding to the urgency and needs of people and communities in developing countries. The climate crisis will intensify, gender and social inequalities will worsen, livelihoods will be destroyed, and lives will be lost. We need parties' commitments to ensure the Paris Agreement goals can be achieved and gender work program can be implemented. There is no climate justice without human rights and gender justice.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to two representatives speaking on behalf of children and youth non-governmental organizations. Kindly be reminded to keep the statement to 2 minutes in total. You have the floor.
Distinguished President, delegates, fellow observers, my name is Lorraine. This to me is my colleague Louis. We speak on behalf of the Children and Youth Constituency Yangon. We voluntarily disclose that we have no direct ties to the fossil fuel industry or other emission-intensive industries and no conflict of interest. It is clear that the space for civil society is shrinking, from badges to door shutting of negotiations. Ironically, the proportional number of fossil fuel lobbyists continue rising, with over 1,700% in the blue zones. COPs are not the space for fossil fuels that are destroying our future. It's time for the UNFCCC to adopt a robust conflict of interest of policy.
We end week one on a mediocre note. We welcome the adoption of the SPI conclusions on Agenda Item 18, which has created a pathway for considering improvements for its implementation, including on the issue of finance. However, an ambitious mitigation work program is not against the spirit of the Paris Agreement. It is the goal of it. We cannot wait for another COP for the mitigation work program. we demand immediate progress on mitigation and the concrete outcomes linked to the global stock date. The NCQG are still miles away from where we need to be. We appreciate the inclusion of crucial language regarding public finance goals and access to financing for vulnerable and minority groups, particularly women, indigenous people, people with disabilities, children and youth. But parties need to pay up for ambitious, public, grant-based climate finance with accountability and transparency. Further, the results of the Just Transition negotiations are nothing to be proud of. With our allied constituencies, we have called for actionable solutions, but are now left with not even a text. We are disappointed that some parties refuse to include MOI indicators in the UAE Belém work program. Parties must ensure meaningful inclusion of vulnerable and minority groups by reflecting their needs in thematic indicators and using disaggregated data. We are disappointed that no consensus was reached on the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism. We call for urgent increases of loss and damage funds and on integrated mental health and psychosocial support into the loss and damage frameworks.
We are disappointed that parties could not come to a consensus regarding the work program on gender. The use of previously agreed language on human rights, the inclusion of gender, intersectionality, and the matters in all negotiation outcomes is pivotal.
Open the door for youth, for us, and not fossil lobbyists. The world is watching, and the time to deliver and take accountability is now.
There is no climate justice without gender justice and human rights. No climate justice without hearing the voice of civil societies and youth. It is your responsibility for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to a representative speaking on behalf of business and industry non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
Thank you, chairs. My name is Noor Al-Amar. I'm from the Global CCS Institute. It is my honor to address you on behalf of the business and industry constituency at this pivotal moment in the negotiations. We are sincerely grateful to the SB chairs for their dedication to the global climate agenda, their positive spirit, and their active engagement with observers. The global business community needs to leave Baku with a bold and definite set of outcomes, one that charts a clear path towards a 1.5 aligned NDC and sets the foundation to catalyze real economic transformation in the crucial years ahead. We recognize the significant effort and hard work of parties during the first week, but with such little time left to resolve essential matters, we are concerned that current progress falls short of what is needed to succeed in this final week. We are encouraged to see some constructive discussions on the NCQG. However, significant work remains to be done on most contentious issues. COP29 must set a highly ambitious and actionable climate finance goal that leaves no one behind, one that sends clear signals to spur investment in NDCs and enable greater private investment. On Article 6, we welcome the major step towards operationalizing the international crediting mechanism made early last week. We are now looking to parties for continued work over the coming days, including at the political level, to deliver a robust and implementable package for cooperative approaches that ensures transparency and high integrity. On mitigation, let us be frank, the mitigation work program is failing to meet its purpose. Businesses see the mitigation work program as an essential vehicle to support the implementation of the first global stocktake by fostering and cross-pollinating the dialogues needed to unlock key opportunities, overcome barriers, and enhance cooperation for mitigation action across all sectors, including a fair and equitable energy transition. In Dubai, through the UAE consensus, you provided direction and clarity to increase the pace and scale on mitigation, adaptation, and finance. Now it is time to act and deliver. As we enter this vital second week, we urge all parties to unite and identify pragmatic and science-based solutions. Mr. President, we look at your leadership and guidance to bring nations together and deliver a successful outcome this week. Bingo stands ready to back these efforts, leveraging the expertise and commitment of our global network of businesses from all sizes and sectors. This is the moment to push ahead with great conviction, renewed collaboration, and unwavering determination to break our limitations. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the representative on behalf of local government and municipal authorities to deliver a statement.
Mr. President, my name is Yunus Erkan, Director of Global Advocacy at ICLE and the LGMA Focal Point. At the outset, we would like to wish you and all your negotiation teams the best of success in this critical moment of the COP29. Earlier this week, the LGMA was happily endorsing the Multi-Sectoral Action Partnerships Initiative as well as COP29 Truce Appeal. We are aware in this first week the mitigation work program and the global finance goal were the most interrelated and complex issues. Therefore, our intervention now will focus on these two, our concrete proposal in that regard. We would like to remind all parties that we left Dubai with a huge sense of positive momentum. Paragraph 161 of UAE consensus urges all parties for multi-level action. Immediately afterwards, the subsidiary body chairs have made it possible that mitigation work program was able to focus on cities, buildings and urban systems. This was the first such a negotiation dialogue since 2018 Warsaw. And over these 10 years, more than 10 years, we have seen a fantastic change in the approach of the UN climate negotiators to engage urbanization in the climate action. In this regard, we would like to encourage the parties and the presidency to ensure all possibilities to seize this opportunity for urbanization multi-level action as a standalone process in this next couple of days. In that sense, our concrete call to parties as follows. We invite UNFCCC parties to support the outcomes of dialogue in order to seize opportunities to enhance successful delivery of Paris Agreement through multi-level action and urbanization, to be presented and agreed at COP30 that builds upon taking into account outcome of the dialogue in 2024, as well as the 20th of November, third ministerial on climate and urbanization. On climate finance, we would like to see an ambitious quantified goals that is just, equitable, well-funded and transition across all levels of government. This should ensure grants rather than loans and concessional terms that are prioritized so that the debt burden on local and other subnational governments is not exacerbated. I thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Kyrgyzstan. The floor is yours.
Distinguished Chair, esteemed delegates, Kyrgyzstan's share in global emission volume makes up 0.03%. However, following Paris Agreement, we have committed to reduce our emissions up to 16% of the business as usual scenario until 2030 unconditionally, and up 36% under the external financial support. We welcome COP29 presidency priority on climate financing. Our transition to more sustainable, climate-resilient green development, constrained by low capacity building and financial shortages, the same as in developing countries. In this regard, we hope that climate finance would be expanded and become more accessible and quickly resolved. Let me remind that mountain communities and ecosystems are most vulnerable to climate change. One of the most critical challenges is glaciers melting, and without ambitious measures to be implemented by whole community with below 1.5 goal, we will lose our glaciers very soon. On November 13, Kyrgyzstan, in collaboration with Azerbaijan and Mongolia, held a high-level dialogue titled Promoting the Mountain Agenda and Integrating Mountain and Climate Change Issues under the UNFCCC framework. Representatives from various countries, international organizations, academia, and NGOs participated in this event, and there was substantial interest and active engagement from delegates. We appreciated the proposals of Azerbaijan presidency to hold presidential consultations on mountains, which we held on November 15. During these consultations, all delegations supported the necessity of mainstreaming mountain and climate change within UNFCCC. We expect in follow-up of proposals made during consultations in outcome decisions of COP29 to continue dialogue on mountains and climate change. We hope that these proposals will be reflected and Kyrgyzstan is ready for further cooperation to advance the mountain agenda and mountains and their ecosystem impact not only mountain communities themselves, but also downstream countries and their sustainable development under the changing climate conditions. We also invite all interested countries to join to the Declaration on Climate Change, Mountains and Glaciers is proposing by Kyrgyzstan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your statement. Dear delegates, dear friends, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Let us approach it with the same spirit of optimism, activism, flexibility and inclusivity that has characterized this conference so far. I declare this joint meeting of the COP, the CMP and the CMA adjourned.